Michael Moore, it's May 2011. You have a book coming out in September 2011. It doesn't have a name.
It does as of this morning.
What is its name?
It's called Here Comes Trouble.
Here Comes Trouble. Why did you come up with that title?
These are stories. They're short stories that I've written, but they're nonfiction short stories. So they're stories from my life, and I've written a couple of dozen stories about the years before people knew who I was, before my first film. So these are from when I was a small child all the way through my 20s, and it sort of shows how I ended up like this. And I believe the book cover is going to have, I saw a picture of it here today. I don't know if they've got it, a picture of me as a 2-year-old. And then across the top it says, Here Comes Trouble.
Were you trouble as a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old?
No, I was, not trouble as in getting in trouble. But my parents did things to me that caused trouble. Like my mom taught me to read and to write when I was 4 years old. This is a dangerous thing to learn how to read at an early age. And so when I went to school, in first grade, whatever, I was already reading books, and I'm having to sit there singing along to A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And it's like, and you learn this very early on as a child. The other kids are not going to like you if you're a little, too smart. So I had to kind of fake, I was trying to remember the letters, A, B, C, D, so they'd like me. And I would come home and I was so bored with school, and it was like, why did you teach me how to read and write so early? And the nuns, I went to a Catholic school, the nuns saw this, and so they one day just decided to skip me. I was in first grade, and they just moved me up to second grade. I came home all excited, and Mom, I'm in second grade. No, you're not. She got on the phone and called the Mother Superior. I want him with children his own age, don't move him up a grade. And the next day I had to go, I got moved back. And then I was just bored through most of school. So what does a child do when he's bored but, cause trouble? So,
who were or are your parents?
My mother, her name was Veronica Moore. She passed away in 2002. A wonderful, great mother to have. I write about her in the book. My dad is still with us. He is turning 90 this summer. His name is Frank Moore. Grew up on the east side of Flint. Comes from both my parents are Irish Catholic families. And my mom's family actually were pioneers in the area. They first came there in the 1830s in Michigan, which was all wilderness then. And then my dad's family, they all worked in the factories of Flint and all that. So they've both been great influences on me, and I've been very fortunate to have them.
How often do you get back to Flint?
Oh, I'm there every month. I live north of Flint, up in northern Michigan. So my dad still lives down in Flint, and I'm down there once or twice a month, spending a number of days with him there. He still drives and goes to mass every day, goes to the gym. Clearly I didn't obey him on that level, but no, I'm in Flint quite a bit, and of course all my friends are still there. So,
politically active family?
I wouldn't say politically active, politically aware. One of the first things I remember is my parents debating Kennedy and Nixon, and my mom was for Nixon and my dad was for Kennedy. And I can remember them out in the garage, putting away some boxes or whatever and having this political debate. And my dad being appalled because we're Catholic, how could you not vote for, this is going to be our first Catholic president. But my mom's family, her dad was the head of the Republican Party in the area in the early part of the 20th century. And Republicans back then, they were, when they said conservative, they meant don't spend money you don't have. Not a bad idea. Conserve the air, conserve the water, the gifts that God gave us, this earth. And of course they were the party of Lincoln. They were very much against slavery and against discrimination and all that. So I had that kind of Republican mother and a father who was a hardcore Roosevelt Democrat.
What about active in the UAW politics?
Yes, so my dad was a UAW member for, well, still is. He's a retiree. He worked on the assembly line building spark plugs for AC spark plug for almost 35 years. And my uncle was in the sit-down strike in Flint in the 1930s.
Uncle Laverne?
Laverne, yes. And did you know him? But he, no, he was yes, he was in the sit-down strike, and which is, I think this year is going to be the 75th anniversary of that. This strike in Flint really created the UAW, really made the UAW, got its first contract with General Motors, and ignited a labor movement in the 1930s across the country.
Michael Moore, at what point in your life do you remember your sense of political right and wrong come into play?
That's a good question. I had a cousin who lived in New York City, and her dad was a state assemblyman, a Roosevelt Democrat himself. And she would come there, we'd alternate. She would come there one summer to Michigan, and then we would come to New York City. And she was a little older than us. Her name was Pat, and she taught my sisters and I a lot about politics, even at a very young age. I remember first, second grade, she having me memorize John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. And I was able to do it. And by second grade, I mean this is what was a little freaky about me. There's this little kid wandering around, ask not, and I try to do the accent, ask not. But I'm like, I'm a little tight. Ask not what this country can do for you. So there was very, I don't know. I think if you come out of an Irish Catholic tradition, you can't help but not be engaged in what's going on around you, and also you can't help but not have a sense of humor about it too, because it's the thing that protects you from the all that is, and so yeah, I don't know. It's I think growing up in Flint, being part of that whole situation.
So you were about 9 years old when JFK was assassinated. Do you remember that?
Yes, I was in fourth. Oh, yes, I remember very well.
Do you write about that in Here Comes Trouble?
Yes, yeah. I write about how we were actually watching educational television, and they broke in, and they must have switched over to NBC's coverage, and Chet Huntley was on and announced it. And of course, all the nuns, they took us all over to church, and we were praying so that he would live. 2 days later, I'm sitting on the carpet in the living room at home watching TV, and my mom is vacuuming, and they are bringing Oswald out, and here you are, you're 10 years old, and 9 years old, and you're watching somebody essentially being shot to death live on television. And I remember yelling, Mom, they shot Oswald, and she couldn't hear me because she was vacuuming, and I reached over and I pulled the plug out of the wall, and she was like, what do you, and I said, look at this. And, and she was the kind of mom who, of course, the first thing is like, oh my God, not another, this weekend has already been dark and horrible enough. But it was also my child had to witness this. And how do I explain this? And so, yeah, I've strong memories of all of that.
Michael Moore, 1968, Richard Nixon gets elected. What was your view at that point? Did you care?
Well, actually, I write about this in the book. This is like, this isn't really a tell-all type book, but I do admit that I went campaigning for Richard Nixon. I was in ninth grade, and I'll tell you what happened. I was very much for Robert Kennedy. He was assassinated, then Eugene McCarthy didn't get the nomination. Hubert Humphrey got it, and he and Johnson were responsible for this war. And I just could not get behind Hubert Humphrey. I'm in ninth grade, what do I know? But I just thought, Nixon said he had a secret plan to end the war, and he was going to end it in 6 months, and that sounded good to me. And so I remember going out campaigning, and I was actually going to the seminary at the time. I left home at 14 my parents let me go to the seminary because I wanted to be a priest. And I remember the bishop one day asked me to come over and do some yard work. And I think he had heard that I was out campaigning for Nixon. And he wanted to ask me about why are you doing that? And he wanted to educate me about Nixon's past and all this. And his name was Bishop Hickey. He went on to become the Archbishop and then the Cardinal in Washington, D.C. And in the 1980s, a very outspoken advocate against our war in Central America and all that. But it was one of those early encounters where somebody is trying to set me straight, and of course, then Nixon got elected and did all these horrible things and continued the war and all that. And obviously, I've never looked back, but I've never wanted to admit that either. So I just have.
What happened to the priesthood?
What happened to the priesthood? Well, I went when I was in 9th grade, and somewhere in between 14 and 15, the hormones kicked in. And I like girls, and I read the rule book, and I figured this isn't for me, because girls look really good, and there was just something about that. I thought, this is a good idea, girls. So I went in to tell the priest, the dean or whatever, that I've decided not to come back next year. And before I get a chance to tell him that, he says to me, Mr. Moore, we've decided to ask you not to come back next year. I said, what do you mean you've decided not? I came in here to quit. You can't kick me out. I'm quitting. No, we are asking you not to. Well, good. He says, we're in agreement. I said, why would you want to kick me out? I'm a good student. He goes, because you ask too many questions. I said, what are questions? And then of course, because I was inquisitive. I wanted to know why women couldn't be priests. Why is that? It didn't make any sense to me. Or the whole thing about, when life begins, human life, and the concept of a fertilized egg being a human being. And I was like, well, why isn't, sperm is life and an egg is life? I mean, a sperm doesn't have a battery pack on it. I mean, that's a living, why don't we protect that? Why don't we stop women each month from losing these eggs? They were like going crazy. No, that's not a human being. I said, well, I don't know if a fertilized egg is it's life, but a stem is not a flower. I mean, you don't say your birthday, pull out your driver's license. It's not 9 months from before you were born. It's when you were born. It's when, you're a human. So I don't know. It was way too advanced at that point, and they probably thought I was trouble, I guess.
What did you study, Michael Moore, at the University of Michigan, Flint?
I went to the University of Michigan, Flint for a year and a half, and I had a double major of political science and theater. So the year and a half I had there would serve me well. I dropped out though. I was, again, I still had this problem of being bored with school. I had just been elected to the Board of Education at 18 years old. It was right after 18-year-olds got the right
city of Flint.
It was called the Davison School District, and 18-year-olds had just been given the right to vote, and I decided to run, and became the youngest elected official in the state of Michigan. And so I was learning more about political science doing it than I was sitting in a classroom. So the first day of my second semester, my sophomore year, being a commuter campus, you had to drive, never enough parking. I drove around and around the parking lot for about an hour looking for a parking spot. Couldn't find one, and after an hour I just said, screw it, I'm dropping out. And I did. I've never been back to school since. I went home and told my parents, said I just dropped out of college. Why? Couldn't find a parking space. That's not a reason. I said, yes, it is. I'm sick of it. So. But stay in school, kids. Don't drop out.
What does your dad think of your work, and what did your mom think of your work?
Oh, well, they're very proud of me. My mom was very proud of me, of course, especially with writing, because it was something so important to her. When she was growing up, my grandparents, I can't tell you what color the walls were in their home or if they have wallpaper, because it was nothing but books. It was just every wall was all bookshelves and books and books. And they read at night. They read, Shakespeare. They'd read all the plays. And they'd read to each other. And So a lot of that was passed on. It was really, I mean, I tell a story in the book of my great-great-grandfather coming from where they were in Pennsylvania and in New York, and then they took a boat down Lake Erie and came to Michigan, and they had these big crates, and where a lot of people had pots and pans and things they were bringing, they had some pots and pans, but they had like crates of books, and it was education and being literate, being aware of the world around you was something that was important.
Will you be doing a book tour with Here Comes Trouble?
Yes, I'm gonna do a book tour this fall. I've actually kind of cleared the decks for the fall, and I'm gonna travel the country and do what I think will be an interesting book tour. The last one I did was a lot of large arenas, and we had, I mean, it was an amazing tour. I mean, we had people in, I remember the University of Florida there in Gainesville, like 14,000 people showed up to hear me speak, and it's very humbling on some level. But so I don't know what I'm going to do. A little bit of that this year, but I want to hit the back roads too. I want to go to some towns that normally don't get authors. I might just get a camper or something and some kind of mini bus or whatever, and do libraries and some bookstores a little bit off the beaten path. And I like going to places too that are not the typical Ann Arbor's, Madison, Berkeley, people where there's an echo chamber. I like going to places down south. I like going to military towns. I like talking to people who maybe disagree with me or think they disagree with me, and it's good for me to listen to them, and I want them to know that while we may have our political differences, we're all Americans, we're all in the same boat, we sink or swim together, and that we have, all of us, more in common with each other than not. If you get out a piece of paper and make a list of all the things that we disagree on, it's a much shorter list than the things that we all agree on. We all want good schools for our kids. We want to drink clean water and breathe clean air. Most of us, I hope by now, think women should be paid the same as men. I think we could make a list of things that we have this agreement on, and the things we disagree on, if I don't want to own a gun, I won't buy one. You want one, buy one. If you don't want to kiss another man, for God's sake, don't. I don't think you'll like it. But if somebody else wants to and they want to get married, hey, come on, right?
What kind of reception do you get when you go to maybe a conservative town or a military town? I mean, are you energized by the back and forth, or does it get hostile?
In military towns never get hostile. I get some of my best fan mail are from soldiers and people in the Navy, Marines, and their spouses and their children. I've really stood up for them, even though I was from the very beginning against the war. I did not like how they were being treated. I did not like how they were being given vehicles that were killing them. That when they come back, up where I live in northern Michigan, I have a movie house that I run with, for the community, and I instituted an affirmative action policy at the theater that says that well, first of all, anybody who's in the military can come to the movies for free, but that we want to hire Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and I said to the rest of the town, I said, we all need to put a sign in our window that says that, because they're coming back and our arms need to be open to them. Those of us from the Vietnam era know the importance of what they're going through and what they're processing coming back from an unpopular war. They need the love and support of their community, and so I've been very active in things like that, and doing things to help the troops and whatever. And so I get a very good response, because our troops are essentially from the working class, and they're African American and they're Hispanic, and they're from groups of people that already know what the deal is. They don't come primarily from Bel Air Bel Air, California, or the Upper East Side of New York. They come from where I come from, so I understand that.
Michael Moore, was it tough to write this book?
Yes.
Because of the personal?
It was very hard. In fact, I put it off for a long time. I mean, I've been wanting to write this book for probably a couple of decades. And then I really started writing it down a couple years ago. And I spent a lot of time on this book, and I'd spend many nights. I mean, I'd be sitting in the chair at the computer, and I'd be laughing, 1 minute at my exploits, and the next minute I'd break down and start crying, because I'm, when you read this, you'll see some of the things I've been through, but it was very cathartic in that way. I mean, it's powerful. It's I'm the proudest of this, of anything I've written, and I set out with that in mind. Even though these are nonfiction stories, I said, the nun in my head said that I must treat this as literature, and I'm going to reach deep into all that I've been given from my parents, from those good nuns, and from the life I've lived, to tell these stories.
So, what would your editor say about working with you?
What would my editor say about
working with you?
She'd say, "Here comes trouble." When I told her the title, she was like, "Oh yes." She just told me here, the title's very popular at the publishing house. I said, "Yes, I can understand why." Well, but the problem they have with me at the publisher is that I don't want to do a 6-city book tour. I want to do a 60-city tour. I mean, I'll do more. A lot of times with authors, they're having to drag them out of the barn. But with me, they've got to try and cool my jets, because I want to get out there and I want to talk to people, and I want to share this with people in the country that I live in here.
Author Michael Moore, Here Comes Trouble, out in fall 2011.